February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Confident, cocky, and certain of a 3-day victory. Kyiv will fall within 24 hours, they said. Russia's military was...
I remember this, and I will fully cop that I thought the same thing. My impression was that Russia would win this war quickly because they have overwhelming military superiority and economic spirit. I thought that. I did not expect it to go the way it has. And even now, I'm continually surprised by Ukraine's resilience and innovation, like the drone thing. I'm continually surprised. I constantly expect it to be over just because of a sheer numbers and economics game. Knowing how important economics is to war, it really stands to how, I guess, corrupt and unmotivated the Russian military is. Like, I can't imagine there is any passion for this war among the rank and file of Russia. And that plus corruption must be seriously stymieing the war effort.
The world's second most powerful, or so we were told. The war, just a formality. 3 years later, Russia holds just 20% of Ukraine, and it's paid for it with nearly 1 million casualties. Yeah, 1 million dead and wounded. More than the US suffered in 2 decades of the war on terror, compressed into just 3 years. And that's only the beginning of the disaster. Today on The Military Show, we're dismantling the illusion that Russia is winning this war. We'll break down the territory myths.
How many Americans died in Vietnam? Because it does have Vietnam parallels, but how many Americans died in... I think they lost far fewer. Yeah, dude, 58,000. Obviously a horrendous number, but losing 58,000 Americans in Vietnam, which is like a horrendous failure, you know, like a real fucking black mark in American history. This is 1 million Russians over 3 years. Think about that.
The manpower crisis, the shattered economy, the propaganda, and the growing whispers that the Russian Federation itself may not survive.
Died or casualties? That's a great point. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's not dead if it's casualties. You got to imagine that the number's higher than 50K. Over 400K dead? Yeah. And plus, you know, a casualty. I mean, if you're seriously maimed, you're not coming back and able to contribute to the Russian economy. You know, they have to pay out veterans benefits. If they do that at all, I don't know, but...
the consequences of Putin's blunder. So if you still believe the narrative that Russia's got the upper hand, you'll want to watch this to the end. Let's start with the cold, brutal numbers. The Institute for the Study of Wars assessment from February 2022 states that Russia captured approximately 4,200 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory last year, most of which was in the Donetsk area. This area is only slightly larger than Rhode Island, the smallest US state by area.
Just to be clear, I want to respond to his first message. I still am of the opinion that Russia has the advantage, just because of the sheer crushing weight of a larger economy, oil exports, money, and people. I still have that opinion. But I am excited to open my eyes to alternative views from this video. First of all, I don't want that to be the case, so I'm probably more amenable to other ideas. And secondly, because I was deeply surprised by that recent drone attack that just showed, I don't know, a level of innovation and fight out of Ukraine that I didn't expect at this stage of the war. So I don't know, I want to learn more.
Comparatively, 4,200 square kilometers is around 0.6% of Ukraine's total territory. And that's where it gets truly mind-boggling.
How does oil help you win a war? In every way possible. In every single way possible. The reason the entire world has cared about oil since World War I, and it's become like the main thing people fight for, it is the fucking artery of war. But on a very specific level, oil helps Russia win the war by supplying them with money. They sell oil on the international market and get tons of funds, one of their greatest sources of money. And they use the money to pay soldiers and buy weapons and et cetera, et cetera. But there's no way that oil doesn't help you win a war.
Forbes did some independent number crunching using statistics from April 2025, where Russia only took around 68 square miles of territory. If Ukraine maintains that level of defenses and Russia doesn't step up on the offensive, the war in Ukraine would take another 230 years. That's how long Russia would need to occupy the entire country, one of the surefire ways to win. The same analysis suggested that Russia would need around 100 million casualties to achieve this, against its total 2025 population of around 144 million. This is far from a strategy. It's a complete absence of one. requiring a multi-generational investment in war, which brings about other severe issues. But territory only tells part of the story. Let's talk about the human cost of Russian President Vladimir Putin's imperial delusions. According to the latest data from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Russian forces have suffered approximately 975,000 casualties since February 2022. While we should approach any wartime statistics from Ukraine
that's a fair
with caution,
caveat.
even conservative Western estimates from the UK Ministry of Defense put Russian casualties well above 750,000 at the end of last year. To put this into perspective, Russia lost approximately 15,000 soldiers during its 10-year war in Afghanistan. In just 3 years in Ukraine,
It is crazy. Both Russia and America at different times got involved in a quagmire in Afghanistan. And in fact, the first Russian one roundabout leads to the, the later American one. The Americans spending money on the Mujahideen in the first one, but it might work for us. Afghanistan has always been an impossible place to rule. I could do it. My first decree as king of Afghanistan would be free ice cream for everyone, no taxes, and everyone gets a Switch 2 on release. Games are discounted to the old Switch 1 price. Uh-oh, I just created a utopia in Afghanistan. $45 rent. Rizzlernomics. We need to start calling it Rizzlernomics when politicians just promise things. Whatever, yeah. We can't afford it, but okay.
They've suffered casualties over 60 times higher. To put it bluntly, this is not a sustainable war effort. Russia's demographic crisis was already severe before the war, with a declining and aging population. The country's fertility rate was crippled by the economic crisis at the fall of the Soviet Union, reaching as low as 1.2 births per woman by the turn of the century. While the situation got slightly better, the country is still far below the replacement rate. As a result, there's a significant lack of working-age males younger than 30 simply because they were never born in the first place, and Russia is also conscripting from that same lacking demographic.
Right.
Now, factor in not just the direct military losses, but also the estimated 920,000 Russians who have fled the country to avoid conscription.
Yeah.
That's nearly 2 million working-aged men removed from Russia's economy and society in just 3 years beyond demographic shortages. In short, Russia is literally running out of people to throw into this meat grinder. But
Dude, it's so funny how that all connects. We talked about on the podcast how China, which has an overpopulation of men as a result of the one-child policy decades ago, now has too many men trying to get married. Those men are flying to Russia because there's an overpopulation of women there. Chinese men are going to Russia to try and find brides because China and Russia have gotten closer economically in trade ties. That's just such a funny how it all connects. It's not cute. It's a bunch of Russian men dying in a pointless war from Putin or fleeing the country. And now, but it doesn't all work out. That's not what I'm saying. You guys are taking it to mean like, oh, you're right, it does all work. That's not what I'm saying. It's not an awe moment. It's just interesting. Oh, that's sweet.
To understand the extent of the tragedy that is likely going to befall Russia, let's roll back to the start of the invasion. Russian military planners were so confident they'd be celebrating in Kyiv within days that they packed parade uniforms. Combat plans shared with troops indicated they should prepare for light resistance followed by occupation duties. In fact, Russia's military logistics were structured around the assumption that Ukraine would collapse almost immediately. Over 3 years later, those assumptions look not just wrong, but delusional. Instead of a swift victory parade, Russia got bogged down in the longest conventional war in Europe since World War II.
That is crazy.
Their Air Force failed to establish air superiority. Their tank forces were decimated by portable anti-tank weapons and drones. Their elite units suffered catastrophic losses in the early phases, forcing Russia to resort to poorly trained conscripts, convicts, and foreign mercenaries.
Right.
The Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, published a damning report in September 2024 titled "The Russia-Ukraine War: A Study in Analytic Failure." The conclusion was that Russia's military planning represented perhaps the most significant intelligence failure of the 21st century. This sentiment was shared by the French...
I've met my Twitch chat, am I right? Up top, dude. Up top, dude. Come on. Significant intelligence failure. You guys spam Glizzy 24/7. It's not YT. Too far. Too far. You say, hey, baldy old fuck. How those glizzy hit. And then I say, Intelligence failure? More like my Twitch chat. That's too far. That's a year of kindness. Ad hominem. You crossed the line. Listen, Atrioc, it's all fun and games, but that's over the line.
Institute of International Relations, IFRI, which posited that Russia forewent its traditional logistical channels due to the erroneous belief that the war wouldn't last more than a few weeks. In short, Putin maintained the illusion that Russia was a great military force, but the military didn't have the planning or logistics to back that illusion up. Due to the secrecy behind the plans involved in the invasion.
Yeah, I mean, it has significantly damaged Russia's international reputation as like an incredibly fearsome military force. Not ruined it, but it significantly has, because prior to the war in Ukraine, the threat of Russia was really high. And it was used often by military contractors to scare countries in Europe and America to spend more on weapons because of how scary Russia's army was. But like, if they're in a 3-year grindy, possibly losing war with Ukraine, then are they realistically a threat to the G7? To, you know what I'm saying? It's not, it's less credible. Obviously nukes are always a threat. I just mean like as a conventional military force. It definitely diminishes them. You know, the idea was like there was this big US, China, Russia. They were all almost the big three. And it just doesn't feel like Russia's in that group anymore.
Many higher officers were caught unaware of the true extent of the invasion and failed to properly stock up on supplies before the war began in earnest. This led to severe supply shortages in the crucial first few months of the war.
Yeah, in a way, it's like almost like fuck the big three. It's just big G. And America. But in a way.
When Russia maintained the initiative. After the initial rebuttal at the Hostomel airport, which was essentially Russia's Hail Mary to conquer Ukraine with minimal losses,
yeah, Russia
failed to properly follow up.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't make a joke about it, but that's the point of the stream, right? We're making serious events light. Russia is the J. Cole of that. In that analogy, Russia would be the J. Cole, and Putin would be dropping Grippy right now.
With a significant lack of adaptability that has become a necessity in modern warfare. Soon enough, Ukraine took back most of the territory it had lost to the initial invasion, and the conflict evolved into one of attrition. Russian propaganda channels still peddled the idea that the war was a foregone conclusion, celebrating minor tactical gains of a few square miles. But in truth, Russia is losing a war to itself by running out of money to fund the war effort. On paper, Russia retains the 11th spot on the list of the world's largest economies.
You know what's fucked though? Is this video came out 9 days ago and it's already so out of date. In that, one of the things that is severely hurting Russia in this war is that oil prices have been astronomically low. And that's where so much of their funding comes from. But what's happening in the Middle East right now with Israel, Iran is driving up oil prices. They're spiking, which is going to dramatically increase the amount of money in Russia's coffers right when the opposite needs to happen. So that is probably not mentioned in this video, but it's worth being aware of how much that impacts the spending money of these like petrostates. Russia has more than oil, but like oil's a huge chunk.
Strip back the veneer, and the situation is problematic at best. Western sanctions have decimated Russia's high-tech sectors, crippled its banking system, and isolated it from global markets. By the end of 2024, the ruble had lost 23% of its value against the US dollar, with the exchange rate between the two currencies fluctuating daily to create incomprehensible uncertainty of the country's real economic status. But the most devastating impact comes from Russia's pivot to a war economy. According to an analysis by Medusa, Russia now spends an estimated 40% of its governmental budget on defense, a level unsustainable for any modern economy. Worse yet, a third of it is hidden under...
Just to be clear, so I looked this up because I wanted to understand it when I was reading something recently. I was reading Price of Peace, and they were talking about different government budgets for war. The example I was looking at was the UK. When the UK had its fucking colossal sun never sets empire, I can't draw it, but when the UK owned a country all over the fucking world, they were spending 10 to 12%, maybe 15 of their budget of their from their GDP on military. It wasn't even that high for world conquering. But during World War II, when it was life or death total war, it was 50%, which is like $1 in 2. $1 in $2 of productivity were going to existential. So where Russia's at is basically almost Britain in World War II level, which is like, and by the way, the result of that, the fallout of that was catastrophic bankruptcy for the UK, where they lost almost all their colonies, lost their status as global reserve currency, lost hegemony over banking. The debts of World War II crippled the UK for decades. And so what Russia's doing right now with a 40% of their economy going into the military is going to have catastrophic effects, not just now, but down the line.
Secret projects related to the military-industrial complex, indicating an unprecedented level of propaganda and paranoia surrounding the Kremlin. What makes the situation even more dire is that Russia's primary source of income, energy exports, faces long-term
government spending. It was government spending as a percent of GDP. So 10% of GDP was spent by the government on military. 50% during the war, just to be clear.
decline. The European Union has reduced its dependence on Russian gas by over 30% since 2022.
Oh, there we go. See,
and oil sales to China and India are being negotiated at steep discounts. The dependence on oil and gas, which constitutes between 30 and 50% of the government's revenue, means that the country's already lacking workforce is increasingly turning to the one single profitable industry, the energy sector. This makes Russian manufacturing increasingly rely on imports, especially from China, as well as the entire country needing to import the workforce to meet its increasing demand.
The whole country is becoming like an oil pay pig for China. China makes all their tech and consumer goods and gives it to them, which they make cheaply, in exchange for oil. Having only one major client is, first of all, bad because you don't get the best deals. Yeah, Russia's kind of like becoming a China satellite state,
Mars. With Russia losing both militarily and economically, it has few options beyond simply continuing as is.
And India. And it is to be said that because the demand for oil is so high around the world, you really can't. It's not easily sanctioned. And there's very clear evidence of India buying Russian oil and then just selling it back to Europe. Like India is just middlemaning, taking a fucking profitable cut when Europe sanctions it. So it's very difficult. But even that does do something because India gets it at a discount, so Russia doesn't get as much money as they would.
Accepting that the war is the new status quo, none of them is good. Option one, but not likely to happen, is a massive escalation. Some hardliners in the Kremlin have pushed for using pretty much everything Russia has to win the war, going so far as to propose the use of tactical nuclear weapons. This wouldn't be the first mention of nuclear warfare, as Putin himself has saber-rattled on the topic more than 24 times. But this scenario would ultimately backfire. While a limited nuclear deployment, such as destroying Kyiv or vital military sites, might create short-term tactical advantages, NATO would be basically hard-pressed to answer with nuclear weapons of their own. In response, Russia would need to use its supplies of weapons on NATO countries, plunging most of the world into nuclear winter. And even that escalation wouldn't solve...
Bro just glossed over that and moved on. Even that wouldn't solve the core problems. You mean what, nuclear winter? The end of society, everyone dead, billions dead? Even then, there'd still be economic problems in Russia. There's no after global thermonuclear war. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Of Russia's core problems. Russia desperately needs both the land and the people in Ukraine. Bombing them into oblivion makes the region uninhabitable, and the country would lose the potential 40 million citizens, which would be used to prop up the failing demographics and workforce instead of resorting to immigration. The second option is withdrawing from Ukraine. Russia would likely only use this as a last resort, as it represents a devastating political defeat for Putin's regime, which has staked its legitimacy on this.
I hope you'll be streaming during it so we can all Atrioc 7. Would you guys Atrioc 7 with me during the apocalypse? If the nukes were falling, would you guys come into my chat and spam Atrioc 7s as we go down? I'll be here, dude. I probably have a brand deal that day. I'm not going to miss my Rocket Money ad. I have to go live. I'm going to tell my family in the bunker they have to wait. I've got to go live. I got to get the viewers.
This war. A withdrawal from Ukraine without achieving core war aims would likely trigger elite fragmentation within Russia and potentially regime collapse. Putin's government is a carefully built house of cards, hinging on the fact that Putin has been able to get what he wants for the past 2 decades. Annexing Crimea and fueling discourse within NATO have been key geopolitical wins for the Russian president.
Right.
If the situation turns around, it will send a clear signal that the country's top echelon of government is actually not nearly as powerful as it seems.
It has sent
that
signal.
This explains why,
Either
despite
way,
catastrophic losses, Russia continues to pour resources into this conflict. The alternative, admitting defeat, is viewed as an existential threat to the current power structure. The third option is a peace deal, even in a limited form. While this might seem most rational after 3 years of basically trench warfare with drones, no side can reach an agreement on it.
Yeah.
First, Ukraine has little incentive to negotiate.
Well, at least we have the world's greatest negotiator, Donald J. Trump, on the case. I'm sure he'll find a way to bring peace. He said he would do it day one, and I know it's been a little bit longer than that, but I'm sure he is getting it done. A peaceful dove, that one. 20 deals in 20 days. Boy, he signed up for a lot of deals, right? Because he's got to do, 90 deals, trade deals. He also has to solve the war in Ukraine. He also has to solve this new war between Israel and Iran. So he's stretched thin, our dear leader. But thankfully, he seems like a guy who's really got his head on his shoulders and doesn't overpromise and underdeliver. That's why he's got goat behavior.
Away territory after successfully defending its sovereignty.
Someone said chronic procrastinator. Oh my God, Trump does national deals the way I did homework in fucking college. Fuck off and play League of Legends until 1 hour before, then try to cram it together.
For 3 years, President Volodymyr Zelensky's peace proposals demand full territorial restoration, possibly including Crimea, as well as security guarantees from NATO. Even if Ukraine cedes territory, Zelensky has put NATO reassurance as one of his top priorities, even if he needs to step down as president in the process. Russia, meanwhile, cannot accept any agreement that doesn't legitimize its territorial conquests. And international geopolitics and relations are further complicating the matters. President Donald Trump's administration's erratic approach to Ukraine.
What if, and this is just a big what if, Ukraine gets all their territory back, or this body of water, what's this called? They make it the Gulf of Russia. The Sea of Azov, Gulf of Russia. Okay? They get naming rights. So they get something big to fall back on. They can claim it's a Gulf of America type beat, but all territory gets back, the war ends, we have peace. Art of the deal? I'm sorry, day one, did I just solve it?
Agreement that doesn't legitimize its territorial conquests. And international geopolitics and relations are further complicating the matters.
Oh, and Ukraine has to act really mad about it. Zelensky has to go, I wish it wasn't called the Gulf of Russia. You got us. He has to pretend like it's a big defeat. Why I oughta, you really got me on this one, Putin.
President Donald Trump's administration's erratic approach to Ukraine has undermined consistent diplomacy. In February 2025, Trump met with Zelensky directly to propose a peace plan that would have ceded significant Ukrainian territory to Russia, contradicting the stated position of his own State Department, caused a near-complete breakdown in relations between the two countries.
This is one of the worst meetings I've ever seen in my life. I cringe when I think about it. This was so bad. You know what's funny is ever since then, we've watched all of these meetings and Vance has never been invited back. I mean, he's always there, but he's no longer sitting close and he's always cut out of the frame. Like, that is the one good benefit of this meeting. Because there was no deal signed, nothing good happened from it. It's bad for American influences, but at least we got Vance out of the fucking...
Ultimately resulting in Ukraine requesting revisions of minerals deals and the US backing out of peace discussions between the warring parties.
He got Wazowski.
Even worse, Russia publicly stated multiple times that it wants to find a peaceful solution, going so far as to accept probationary ceasefires. None of them worked, with the 30-hour Easter ceasefire resulting in Ukraine claiming Russia broke it nearly 3,000 times. So Russia is caught in a strategic trap of its own making, unable to win militarily, unwilling to accept defeat, and incapable of pursuing a diplomatic solution.
That doesn't sound good.
Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What has Russia actually achieved through this catastrophic military adventure? Before the invasion, NATO was an alliance searching for purpose, with many questioning its relevance in the post-Cold War world. Trump himself criticized the alliance, as most members failed to meet the basic requirement of using 2% of their GDP on the military. Today, it's revitalized and expanded, with Finland and Sweden as new members. The 800-mile border between Finland and Russia practically doubled the NATO-Russia border, significantly curbing Russia's ability to actually defend itself in a theoretical conflict against the economically larger, demographically stronger, and militarily more modern alliance.
Right.
Specifically, the biggest changes came to countries that can hold large sway in the alliance. Germany, one of the world's largest economies, instituted new funding incentives for national defense. Poland, which was once a member of the Warsaw Pact, plans to create the largest standing
this is not the greatest thing in the world. The biggest consequences of Russia invading Ukraine are, first of all, millions dead, which is horrendous. And then a remilitarized Europe, that always ends well. You know, I guess it's good they're paying for more of their own national defense, but That's not.
army in Europe. Sweden and Finland have pushed their military-industrial complexes to the limit, sending prototypes of vital equipment to Ukraine and partnering with US and UK contractors to deliver deadlier weapons. Diplomatically, Russia has transformed from a respected, if difficult, global power into a pariah state with limited international options.
I work in defense contracting, so I like it. Yeah, I just have a general sense that when defense contracting is doing well, the world is doing poorly. Your industry is not a good sign. Your stocks being up is a bad sign for humanity.
Russia's largest trading partner switched from the EU to China, a country that is even more dependent on resources and can significantly undermine Russian policies to get access to them. All of these issues come from a single problem that Russia failed to account for: the glaring gap between its projected military power and actual combat performance. Before February 2022, Russia.
Well, they also failed to account for the fact that Donald Trump, in a ghillie suit, crawled on his hands and knees into Germany to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. And that really cut off a source of connection and funding. While not president. He did this between his two terms.
Military was widely considered the world's second most formidable fighting force. Military analysts routinely cited its 1,320,000 active.
Biden got the one man for the job he knew could get it done. Imagine Biden and Trump as secret friends. Biden calls up Trump. Listen, I got a job for you, Donnie, but it's got to be deep undercover. They can't know we were. Enemies to lovers arc. Holy fuck. And then Donald Trump in the explosion of Nord Stream, like Russian agents hunting him down. He's like calling in, Joe, I don't think I'm going to make it. I wanted to let you know you made America great again yourself. Holy shit. Why don't we live in that world? Tell Melania I love her. You tell her yourself, Jack. That's pretty good. Well, filmed in Vancouver. Run it all together. That's fire.
Duty personnel, 2 million reservists, 6,000 tanks, and 4,000 aircraft as evidence of overwhelming
that's good
strength.
stuff, bro.
Annual military parades showcased supposedly cutting-edge equipment like the T-14 Armata tank, Su-57 stealth fighter, and hypersonic
What's he
missiles.
talking about?
The Global Firepower Index consistently ranked Russia second, only to the United States. Western military planners built entire defense strategies around.
Yeah, I talked about this on the podcast, but there's like strong evidence that military contractors in America, people like Northrop Grumman or Raytheon or whatever, were deliberately amplifying how strong the Russian threat was, how incredible their military was, how high-tech it was, how elite it was, in order to sell more weapons, both to America and to Western Europe. And it turns out that that was dramatically overplayed. Like, that common consensus thought was not true.
Countering this perceived threat. And when the second largest military invaded a smaller neighbor, it turned out that none of the statistics really mattered. Instead of the feared Russian colossus, we saw elite paratroopers dropped into Hostomel Airport without proper support, resulting in a complete failure to establish the air tunnel necessary to win the invasion. 40-mile-long armored columns running out of fuel just miles from their own borders.
That's embarrassing.
Tanks deployed without infantry support, making them easy prey for Ukrainian anti-tank teams. Russia resorting to sending human wave attacks, a tactic considered fit for World War I. Logistics trucks with commercial tires that failed in off-road conditions, aircraft unavailable to effectively suppress Ukrainian air defenses, museum pieces like the T-62, T-55, and possibly even the T-34 from all the way back during World War II making their way to the front line.
Bring
Perhaps
back the
most
classics.
damning was the so-called modern equipment itself. Those supposedly advanced T-90M tanks, many were found with what should have been reactive armor blocks filled with sand and cement instead of explosives. The feared attack helicopters and fighter jets, plagued by navigation systems so unreliable that pilots taped commercial GPS units to their dashboards. And what
Dude, fucking taping a Garmin to your attack helicopter dashboard to go to war is crazy work. Getting the pop socket phone stick thing and going to fucking Google Maps. Fucking dropping the pin. That's fucking crazy.
What about those next-generation weapons that caused so much concern in Western defense circles? The T-14 Armata tanks made a brief appearance in 2023 before being withdrawn. They either failed miserably or were too expensive to get blown up by cheap drones. The Su-57 stealth fighters have
Android
conducted
Auto.
only limited strike missions from safe distances within Russian airspace, lobbing glide bombs, the one saving grace of Russian military tactics, which also harken back to its Cold War weapon stores. But how could Russia's military leadership so catastrophically misjudge both their own capabilities and Ukrainian resistance? The answer reveals something fundamental about Putin's Russia. Russian intelligence services believed that Ukrainian forces would immediately collapse and that most Ukrainians would welcome Russian troops as liberators. This wasn't just a military miscalculation.
I mean, America has made that miscalculation a couple times ourselves. I distinctly remember hearing on the news as a child how Iraq was going to welcome us as liberators, and Afghanistan. And I heard it all the time because I was on military bases growing up. It was like, they're going to be so fucking stoked. And I believed it as a kid. I was like, oh, well, I guess they will. We're going to be winning hearts and minds.
It was a fundamental failure to understand reality, driven by the very propaganda machine Putin had created to maintain his grip on power. One of the fatal flaws of the authoritarian regime that Putin created in Russia is that it completely depends on Putin's image as a leader. Brookings maintained that this is only tenable so long as the autocrat stays in power, which can severely damage the longevity of the country as a whole. Former Kremlin advisor Gleb Pavlovsky, now in exile, explained it more bluntly in his April 2022 interview. This is all Putin's own personal decision. Nobody, including myself, realized just how maniacally obsessed he must have been with Ukraine. We underestimated the extent of decay of the Russian government. Remember, this interview was only a month and a half into the invasion, and the same sentiment rings true 3 years later. The Russian military itself became a victim of this distorted reality. Corruption was endemic, but hidden from official reports. Training exercises were choreographed performances rather than realistic preparations. Equipment maintenance existed on paper, while actual hardware deteriorated in storage. This is underscored by a closer examination of Russia's military doctrine. As a holdover from Soviet times, Russia's perceived biggest risk was a NATO invasion. To that end, Russia created operations and strategies to defend the motherland rather than invade. Its concentrated command structure would help it shore up weaknesses in defenses, but it also opened itself up to rampant corruption and power reshuffling once Putin came into power. With Russia losing momentum, there's a possibility that Putin himself could be ousted from the Russian throne.
I mean, they had the little mini coup from Prigozhin. Dr. Battle gave us a brilliant report on that. Prigozhin, for whatever reason, stood down right before he got to Moscow, and then of course was killed later. It's just crazy. He really he should have seen that coming. I just don't understand how he didn't see that coming.
After all, he would be quickly found solely responsible for the disaster, and power-hungry politicians in the Kremlin would need to save face by removing him. However, Brookings succinctly analyzed that
it was an accident. Dude, imagine a world where Putin's actually a really sweet guy and everyone he's enemies with just happens to die and he feels terrible about it. Maybe Putin is like really lonely because everyone he tries to reach out to or talk to ends up dying. He feels like a rogue in X-Men where he's got the death touch. And that's why he's just sit alone at that big long table. Maybe he, like, the last thing he told Prigozhin is like, be safe on that helicopter, man, fly safe. And then when the helicopter's crashing, I bet he's like, he's going to think it was me, but it wasn't. They need to improve window safety? Yeah, he's probably like, he's on a big crusade to improve window safety in Russia because billionaires keep falling out of windows.
Russia's current political structure doesn't really have a viable candidate to succeed him, and that the entire regime might not survive a leadership change. This opens up a chance that Russia itself could collapse. This would happen in a few stages, but they would progress rather quickly or even coincide with one another. First, there's the economic breakdown. Russia's war economy is already showing severe strain, with defense spending crowding out essential services. As casualties mount and sanctions bite deeper, this becomes unsustainable. Critical infrastructure, already suffering from underinvestment, begins to fail more frequently. Second, political fragmentation.
Dude, I mean, 40% of your GDP is going to the military. Just think about that. It's almost 1 out of every 2 productive dollars going to something that explodes, going to something that has no value. That just gets shot out of a gun or blows up or gets blown up. Like, it has no economic benefit. So you're just burning your economy down. Wars in general are so disastrous, so straining to the economy. Even small ones have bankrupted large nations. But a big one like this, the damage is like, especially if you don't win, it's just unbelievable longer term.
Regional governors, especially in resource-rich areas like the Far East, begin asserting greater autonomy from Moscow. Initially presented as an economic necessity, these moves gradually acquire political dimensions. Third, military disintegration. As the professional army is ground down in Ukraine, Russia increasingly relies on poorly trained conscripts and ethnic minorities from peripheral regions. Unit cohesion breaks down, desertion rates skyrocket.
The only thing I'll say about this, I think this video is actually well made. I didn't see anything that seemed like a glaring error. It seemed well sourced and made sense. Maybe that's my bias, but I was impressed by it. But I will say, like, this is also true of Ukraine, right? My understanding is they are also running out of people. It is difficult to get conscripts, even though people are more likely to want to do it in Ukraine because it's for national defense and there's a reason behind it. They're running out of, like, prime age people, and people have deserted. At least some. So I wouldn't say this is just a Russia problem, and that's why I still am uneasy about Ukraine's, I don't know, status in the war, as impressed as I've been by their defense.
Military equipment fails without replacement parts. Finally, the central authority collapses. Whether through a palace coup, popular uprising, or simply the inability to project power to Russia's vast regions, the Moscow government loses effective control over significant portions of Russian territory. The consequences would be catastrophic, and not just for Russia, but for global security. The Federation would likely collapse into a series of states.
Dude, if Russia balkanizes with all those nukes, they have the most nukes of any country, more than America? Well, that's absolutely not what we want.
Resembling the breakup of Yugoslavia or the fall of the Soviet Union itself in the 1990s. The core of the country, Moscow and St. Petersburg, would likely attempt to relocate Russia's nuclear weapon reserves and proclaim itself the successor state, saber-rattling with the arsenal much like Putin does during the war. Scores of immigrants would try to enter the EU again, going after the successes seen by former Warsaw Pact members like Romania and Poland. China might swoop in and occupy swathes of resource-rich territory in Siberia for itself to fuel its bottomless industry. So the next time someone confidently tells you that Russia is winning in Ukraine...
What a fucking reversal of history that would be. If China goes from Russia's little bro to Russia's big bro to occupying fucking Eastern Russia, what an insane turnaround. Balkanization isn't a bad thing. Yeah, take a look at the Balkans. They're so great. You're right. It worked out incredible in the namesake.
You just need to go back to the beginning. After 3 years of what was supposed to be a war that lasted a few days, Russia controls just 20% of Ukraine, has suffered casualties approaching 1 million, has devastated its economy, destroyed its international...
You get Luka Doncic thanks to the Balkans. If balkanizing Russia gets the Lakers a center, I'll consider it.
...standing, reinvigorated its adversaries,
7-5?
and has no viable path
7-5?
to
right.
actual victory. The truth is
I was
Russia
getting greedy. I was getting greedy. I wasn't getting greedy enough.
Disaster entirely of its own making, with no good options and no clear exit. The longer this war continues, the more catastrophic the consequences will be for Russia itself.
You know what's interesting? Okay, so I thought this video was quite good, and I guess I would sum it up by saying I don't disagree with any of it, and I fully agree that consequences, no matter what, will be catastrophic for Russia. Even if somehow they won tomorrow, I think they are too deep for the unavoidable deep economic pain and backlash and demographic problem. I agree with all that. However, it still doesn't prove to me, I guess I'm still skeptical that Ukraine is not also in an extremely precarious situation. I'm hopeful. I mean, the video at least gave me some hope, but yeah, Russia losing doesn't mean Ukraine's winning, I guess is a good way to put it. That's a better way to put it. Chat's got some smart fucking takes today, shockingly.